Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN Sunday for Sunday, July 18th, 2021. We've got another great show for you this week. I'll be joined by members of the media, academia, and financial services as we analyze all the news in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more. So sit back, relax, enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday. Let's kick things off with a look at what's going on on Capitol Hill. Joining us, they're known as the Legal Eagles, but they're also known as David Levine, Kevin Walsh. Both are principals with Green Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, or Washington if you're from Baltimore, D.C. Gentlemen, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
It is great to be here, hon. I'm thrilled to really be able to join you, in our discussion of Baltimore East, because I lived in Baltimore and I love it. Baltimore, and I love it. But, we're excited to be here, and I know we're a little late for this, but I think this week, Jeff, we're going to talk about what do we see coming in regulation and guidance in the second half of 2021. With that said,
it's exciting.
Ahead, yes.
I was going to say it's an exciting topic, David, and I think you were going to pitch it over to Mr. Walsh to kind of kick things off. Kevin, get your perspective. I don't think this is a boring yawn topic at all. I think if you are engaged in the retirement industry or thinking about retirement, you want to know what's coming down the pike, regulatory or legislative wise. Kevin, to you.
Thanks, Jeff. And we may be approaching the dog days of summer, but that doesn't mean that the Department of Labor is resting on their laurels and just taking a breather by the ocean. Instead, what we're hearing is that the Department of Labor is working rigorously on three different rulemaking packages. We're hearing that they're working on revising Form 5500. We hear that they're working on an environmental social governance package, and we hear that they might be redoing, fiduciary again. So, just as a little bit of I'll talk a little bit about the Form 5500. Basically, so what Form 5500 is, and wow, it's a mouthful. So I'm just going to call it the filing. What the filing is essentially is that plans each year are required to file a report with the Labor Department that provides a comprehensive overview of largely the plan's financials, the plan's participants, what's going on in the plan, what the plan looks like. In recent years, the Labor Department's been using that form as a tool for figuring out which plans to investigate and audit. So a recent initiative is missing participants. And what the Labor Department's been able to do is look at the participant information that's disclosed in Form 5500 and determine whether or not a plan may be a better target for investigation than another plan. Well, what the Labor Department's trying to do, or what we believe they're trying to do, is to make the form more robust so that if they want to investigate other areas, like, excessive fees or service provider relationships, or, other things, that it's easier for DOL to, just do a text search, do a search of all the forms that have been filed, and figure out who to target. David, do you want to add anything on Form 5500, or do you want to pivot to environmental, social, and governance rulemaking?
Yeah, only one comment to add on the 5500. I want to go back in time in the Wayback Machine a little bit, because as I know Kevin and Jeff, I know you both know really well, there was talk about redoing the 5500 during the Obama administration, and there was concern and there was some ideas proposed to require extreme granularity on the 5500. As the past couple of years have borne out, the 5500 is often a prime source of data, not only for people understanding their plans, but also for lawsuits. And we can debate the merits of lawsuits here, left, right, and sideways.
Next week, debating the merits of lawsuits.
There we go. But at the same time, I do think that you need to think carefully, because how much data is too much data? It's kind of like Congress, for instance, in Secure 2.0, they have sort of direction saying, look at the notices. They've done this over and over. Do you really need all these notices? I'm in favor of things like transparency within reason. So we really need to think about what the balancing act is if the DOL moves there. But you're right. ESG is a big thing, Kevin. To get to ESG, we've talked about it. It is the up, down, up, down, up, down routine. And we're not going to go over it again. But definitely, given the president's executive order focusing on ESG, and it is very likely we will get guidance that finds a way to encourage and enhance the use of ESG. As I think we've talked about before with you, Jeff, we recognize it's an interesting area because there's a lot of alignment between, well, tons of groups in the industry. I can't think of any like large segment of this industry, whether it's plan sponsor, service provider, investment, that says, wow, I don't like ESG. There's different perspectives on the value and use of ESG. We're not going to go there, but I definitely think it will open up the door more to the use of ESG as we go forward. And the question is, will it stick, or will the next time there's a Republican administration, will it yo-yo yet again? What do you think, Kevin?
I mean, I think that we were talking about ESG investing last summer, and we were talking about how the Trump administration was trying to do a rule, and that, they might compromise some to come up with a rule that was going to stick because they know that it's yo-yoed. And it seems as though we're having the same discussion now with the Biden administration, that they're going to do a rule and they're going to try to make it stick because they know that it's yo-yoed. And that makes me somewhat pessimistic that we won't see a continuing of the yo-yo effect around, taking things into account other than retirement security.
And gentlemen, just real quick, we know that the Securities and Exchange Commission is also looking at ESG rules to try to make these rules more, or these funds, these investments more sustainable. You like that pun?
That's a good pun. That's a good pun. And I think that, if the SEC comes out with rules that make it clearer to investors what they're getting, because both the DOL and the SEC have been somewhat concerned that folks have been, slapping the ESG label on funds without really having an ESG investing style. That if this term gets better defined and different ESG goals get better defined, better quantified, better able to be measured, better able to be, investigated to see if they're actually doing what they say they're doing, then you could see how other regulators might think, now might be the time to make it easier to allow folks to invest in ESG aims. So if the SEC is successful in terms of, seeking to ensure that funds that hold themselves out as ESG funds are in fact ESG funds, that could help make this an easier discussion in the retirement space.
And let's pivot. Last thing I think in this trifecta, this trident, if you will, is I just lost it. Oh, fiduciary rule.
Fiduciary.
What was I thinking? It's like the most important. It's the bedrock by which all of us are measured, right? So not you guys, but I mean, it's what you do and to make sure that people are doing the right thing. What's up with fiduciary rule? Up, down, up, down, up, down, down, up.
Well, with fiduciary, we've been stuck with, or we've been graced with some regulatory stability. The Labor Department released a rule in 1975, and that is a 5-part test rule, and it has stood the test of time. It's gotten from 75 to 2020, staying intact.
But Kevin, wasn't there a bunch of stuff in the 2010s?
The challenge here is that while the 75 rule remains the champion, there have been a lot of insurgents. So if we look at 2010, we look again at 2015, again at 2016. There's some discussion in the preamble of a 2020 rule that relates to it. There have been a number of attempts to redo the 1975 rule and its 5-part test. And if you're an industry participant, if you're a plan fiduciary, if you're not even a plan fiduciary, but just someone who sells products to retirement plan investors, then this is a topic that you've got to be paying a lot of attention to, because during the 2010s, the Obama administration and kind of the messaging we're starting to hear out of the Biden administration is that there's on the regulator side, there's some unhappiness about the current world of folks who are fiduciaries. And there's some unhappiness that some of these folks at the outside of the retirement system are not themselves fiduciaries. So I think later this year, we'll expect to see a proposal that will, in all likelihood, seek to make more people fiduciaries than are fiduciaries today. Now, this is similar to what was done in 2016. In 2016, the Fifth Circuit said, "Oh, come on," and struck down that rule. But the Labor Department, they've had 4 years to think about this, and it's a new administration that seems to want to go in the same direction. So they might not get tripped up the same way as they did in their last attempt. David, do you want to chime in, or Jeff? I hear you laughing.
I'm just laughing because they might not get tripped up in the same way. They'll just get tripped up in a different way. There's a lot of powerful interest. This is my point of view, not yours. So there's a lot of powerful interest there that oftentimes can work for or against a particular issue. Sorry, David, you have a much more balanced point of view than me. I'm kind of I'm fickle.
We're lawyers. We go in whatever direction we're supposed to. No, all jokes aside. Yeah, I agree with what Kevin said. I think we just have to wait and see. There, inevitably, if it goes too much towards 2016, could we see another lawsuit? Absolutely. But at the same time, there is such a thing, and I've heard this used a number of times, is fiduciary fatigue. Because this back and forth has been going on so long, and it was so bluntly hard fought in so many different camps, it'll be interesting to see what the DOL puts out, how people react to it, and where it goes, because you could see lawsuits. But just like the 2020 guidance that we got from the DOL in the last days of the Trump administration, while folks may not agree with everything in there, didn't generate the intense uproar that the 2016 did. Does 2020 did that 2020 guidance set the roadmap for what's going to happen this year? We'll have to wait and see, Jeff. And that's the end of our segment.
There you go. And it sounds like you've got a whole group of people behind you, David, that are clapping and clamoring for more. David Levine, Kevin Walsh, it's a pleasure chatting with you. And I don't think this was a yawn segment at all. I think this was a great segment laying out the framework of what we could see.
Well,
go ahead.
Jeff, I have to comment. Kevin, really said it was a yawn segment. So I don't take any of that. Oh, wait, that was me saying I thought we might bore the listeners today. You're right. It's my fault.
Well, absolutely not. And we always appreciate having you guys on. And look, you're in the A block today again. So it just shows your popularity continues to rise. Gentlemen, have a great rest of the weekend. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for coming on, Jeff.
Bye, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
Welcome back, and now we're going to talk about technology, consumer products, and also a little bit of travel. Joining us on the line, Daniel Klein is lead advisor, executive producer for Seven Investing. Dan, great to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Jeff. Live from Birmingham, Alabama, of all places.
Well, Birmingham's a great city. I'm not sure. Is there a football team in Birmingham? Not an NFL team, but is there a good college team there?
I'm going to guess Alabama's around here somewhere, but I don't know. I got in pretty late last night. I have a view of a Jack in the Box. So.
Okay. Well, I hope that's a good view, and I hope you enjoy it. Let's talk about travel, Dan, since you took a flight to Birmingham. And let's talk about theme parks, because they are reopening. You're a theme park connoisseur, I would say. They're never going to be the same, are they, after the pandemic?
No, I don't think they are. So to set the record straight, I drove, but that is an entirely different story.
I'm so sorry. You ruined it.
I was supposed to fly to North Carolina, then to Alabama for two separate trips. And let's just say Delta Airline did not cooperate. But yeah, when you go, since the pandemic, theme parks, and I've been to Disney multiple times and Universal once. Disney's done a very good job. Universal, the less said, the better. But when you go to Disney, they've gone to things that used to be part of the fun, like fast passes, have gone away. And they're moving towards more virtual queues and upsell experiences. So it's unfortunate to say to people, but if you cap Disney capacity at, say, 75, 80% of where it used to be, you could likely charge more. You could also, within that, sell better access to the line. So my son and I were at Hollywood Studios, and they don't say what the capacity is now, but let's say it's about 50% capacity. But, and this is a big but, a lot of the big shows that eat up people aren't operating because it takes time to get those actors backed up to speed. Mm-hmm. So, if there's 2,000 people watching a parade and 1,500 people watching the Indiana Jones stunt show, that's 3,500 people who aren't in line. That's a meaningful amount. So if you're at about 50 capacity, that's probably what it looks like at 75, 80% capacity with everything operating. And here's the reality. There were waits for everything, but nothing was excessive. So, if my son wanted to do Tower of Terror, which he did, that took him about 45 minutes. It actually took me longer to get coffee at Starbucks because people are idiots and they don't know how to order at Starbucks. And it took him So I think you're going to see more theme park operators thinking about what the user experience is like, because waiting up 45 minutes to an hour isn't that bad. Waiting 2 hours is miserable. So if I'm traveling with a family of four, and I don't have a family of four, so Jeff, we'll bring you with us.
Oh, that's great.
But,
Thank you, Dad.
traveling with a family
I
of
think I'm
four,
older than you are, though.
a
So
little bit,
a
but
little hard to do.
4 days at Disney, the tickets alone might cost us close to $2,000. For that $2,000, you want to deliver a good experience. And I think that's something theme park operators are thinking a lot about. They're also doing things that make sense. So when you went to a casual restaurant, you used to wait in a really long line, place your order, and even though there's only like 5 things on the menu, so they know what people are going to order, you always would have to like cram off into a side area to wait. Now, when I get to the park, or even the night before, I can place a mobile food order. And when I'm heading over to that restaurant, I can say, hey, why don't you make my meal? And then when I get to the restaurant, you actually stand outside, still socially distancing, even though there's not a lot of protocols left at the parks. And then it says, hey, Dan, your order's ready. I go in, my food is at the counter. It's a much better experience. So I think you're going to see a lot of stuff like that just become the norm. And I understand not everyone has a phone. And right now, where that's required, that can be difficult. But when that becomes 95% of the ordering, the other 5% won't be a big problem. So I see just a lot more technology. The only issue, and I think it is kind of an issue, is that there's not a lot of phone charging capacity at any theme park. And you are using your phone an awful lot. So I do think that's something they're going to have to address.
Very interesting. I'm surprised they don't have charging stations. Maybe they'll get to that. Dan, let's shift. Go ahead. You wanted to make a comment?
No, I was going to say that everybody stops to eat at some point. They should have, cables and wireless charging stations. They used to have those batteries you could get inexpensively and just trade in when they were done. And for some reason, they don't. So there are some, if you're going to a park, there are some sort of hidden secret charging stations. You can certainly Google that. But I actually think it needs to be a lot more common.
Dan, let's now switch gears. Content creators really stepping to the fore here. Firms like Facebook willing to spend billions of dollars to support content creators because they're like Netflix and like we've talked about with streaming platforms, people are hungry for new innovative content.
Yeah, so this is basically Facebook realizing that it's losing some of its creators to TikTok, to other platforms. So they came out and said, hey, we're going to put a couple $1 billion into content creation, and we're not going to take a cut of that until I think they said 2023. That's a direct dig at Apple that takes a 30% cut. I don't know what the cut is on TikTok, but there's obviously a cut there. So Facebook is trying to use the size of Instagram to say, hey, look, this money isn't that relevant to us. We'll eventually take a piece of it. But right now, hey, do your best. Go create, be on our platform, because some of these people, it's not you and I, Jeff. You and I, whatever, a couple 100,000 people watch a show, even if it's 30, 40,000 people for some people. That doesn't move the needle as much as the guy who has 10 million followers, who I don't know what he's doing. He's opening packages that got mailed to him or whatever ridiculous.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
So they really need those people. And look, if you're bringing in, I have a friend, my buddy Lon Seidman, who does a tech channel on YouTube, and he makes a living. And I don't know what the numbers are. It's not like he tells me what he makes, but it's his job. But let's pretend he makes $100,000 a year, and the platform he's on takes 30%. Well, that's a really meaningful chunk. So if a different platform says, hey, we're not going to take any percent, well, that gives him every incentive to cross-post to that platform. And if it works and his audience follows him, well, he's going to direct his audience to that platform. And Lon, I apologize for using you as an example. He might make millions. He might make dollars. I have no idea. But as a creator, and I'm in the process of launching a bit of a fun YouTube thing, not really a money thing, just me talking about sort of my experiences on cruises and how people should navigate that. Well, if I start to get to the point where that's popular and I make money, well, yeah, I'd rather it be on a Facebook-owned platform, because if I'm making $100 a week, they're not taking my $30 from me. I think it makes sense. I think it shows the escalating battle. I think we're going to see the same type of thing in app stores. I think we're already seeing that in television licensing deals, where if you have a hot show and Netflix wants it, and so does Hulu, and so does one of the broadcast networks, well, you might have the ability to get your whole first season guaranteed, it happens in the TV world, but that's been a rarity. You might, even if it's got a big enough star attached, be able to get a guaranteed 2 seasons. So I think the pendulum is tilting a little bit towards creators, and thank God, because the world is generally tilted against creators. The internet has democratized that a bit, but it's still been a financial slog for most people.
The streaming wars now in the trenches, I guess, is what we're seeing. Dan, it's a look. This has been a fascinating segment, really interesting, and I think we're going to be talking a lot about content creation and probably theme parks for many segments to come. Dan, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
I'll meet you on top of Space Mountain next week.
I'm there, except I don't like roller coasters.
No, I
Thanks.
I don't either.
Thanks, Daniel. Bye. Welcome back. Now we're going to check in on the healthcare news. Joining us on the line, she is the healthcare editor for Business Insider, and she's also the editor of Dispense, a daily newsletter that really aggregates and curates all the news in healthcare each and every day. We're talking about Lydia Ramsey Flanzer. Lydia, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So a lot going on in healthcare. I guess top of mind for you might be, I don't want to put words in your mouth, could be the COVID-19 coronavirus seems to be making a bit of a resurgence after some solid months.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch. So I think I've mentioned this before, but I'm based in Denver, so I've kind of seen parts of Colorado start to have this spike in Delta cases, especially where folks are less vaccinated. It's usually more places on the western part of the state, but it's still interesting to see it happening. But yeah, we're seeing a resurgence of cases here in the U.S. I think I just saw a stat that Florida is now responsible for like 1 in 5 COVID cases being reported right now. And it's a tricky thing, right? We've gotten a fair amount of our population vaccinated, but as we've seen in other countries, it's definitely not a perfect thing. We're going to see breakthrough cases, and we're going to have moments where people who are fully vaccinated are getting, especially this seemingly really quite contagious Delta variant.
And yeah, I mean, that, kind of reading the story, obviously that is a concern, not only here in the U.S., but also abroad. This Delta variant has a lot of potential for getting out of hand. Lydia, there was a great story yesterday, I think it was, on what it's like to get COVID-19 while fully vaccinated. I think it came from the pages of Dispense, or at least from Business Insider. What's the perspective there? I mean, is it for an individual who's been fully vaccinated, either gotten the Johnson & Johnson, the Pfizer, or the Moderna, gotten the double shot, the one shot, and then to get COVID? What's the reaction there?
Yeah, I think a lot of people expressed to some of my colleagues on the health team who covered that story, they expressed like how grateful they were that they had been vaccinated. When we initially, when we first started talking about vaccines probably a year and a half ago, when they were just kind of off in the distance as this like dream scenario. A big thing then, and a big thing still now, is like ultimately we want these vaccines to help keep people out of the hospital and keep people from dying. We saw like hospitals being flooded. We're starting to see hospitals getting filled up again, especially with unvaccinated folks. But I think the big thing I've been hearing from people who have gotten COVID after being fully vaccinated is just the gratitude that, their cases are mild, or they're, not even symptomatic at all, or, they're much easier to contain. I think the only times we're seeing really hospitalizations or deaths has been in moments where someone has like a lot of other extenuating circumstances or conditions that are kind of impacting or compounding with this infection. So
is it still, and you're obviously closer to the CDC and FDA than I am, because you cover the space, and is it still a recommendation to wear masks 6 feet, be apart, and get the vaccine if you don't have any other predispositions to not getting it, right? I mean, you might be allergic, whatever. There might be reasons that you can't get the vaccine. But is it still the same course of action? Hey, look, we're not through this. Let's not undo all the work that we've done. Wear the mask or stay in your house, quarantined, and 6 feet away.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You saw in, what was it, May, where the CDC came out and dropped kind of mask mandates and said, like, our recommendations are that you don't need a mask inside if you're vaccinated. You can go to weddings, you can do all these things. So it's been interesting to me to see, just how impactful masks have been. Israel is kind of like the case study for us at this point, where a lot of folks in their population have been vaccinated, and yet, so they dropped all the mask mandates and things like that, and then they saw this big resurgence of Delta cases among their vaccinated population. So, it's interesting to me to read headlines like, I think it was yesterday, LA County reinstated an indoor mask mandate. And it's something I've been following, kind of case by case based on where I am in the country and how safe I feel in crowds and stuff. I'll still wear my mask inside, and I don't think it's a bad idea. Just watching what Delta's up to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the most important thing is, we shouldn't be dropping our guard and thinking that the worst is behind us because, maybe people aren't paying it. It's the summertime, so people may be traveling or getting outside and doing fun things, which is great. But you don't want to be dropping your guard and then become susceptible to what is arguably a very different strain of this virus, which viruses go through different iterations. I mean, there's no perfect strain of vaccine. There's not going to be for a particular variant or a particular type of virus, but it really is still being vigilant and not kind of giving in to your I guess your instincts to just say, hey, I'm done and hallelujah.
Yeah, it's hard because I think everyone's kind of been in that like, phew, we're out of this thing. But to see the cases go back up means, okay, we still aren't quite out of the woods just yet. But again, I keep coming back to, I'm going to be really curious to see how different this wave looks. Mm-hmm. Ideally, we'll see a lot fewer deaths, a lot fewer hospitalizations. So hopefully that's a good sign. But it does mean, if people aren't vaccinated, now is quite a good time to go and get that dosage.
Yeah. And Lydia, just kind of changing gears a little bit. I know one of your colleagues, Shelby Livingston, did a story on betting big on care delivery. And it seems like small, and not to be belittling the coronavirus issue, that's a huge issue, but also ongoing, the delivery of care, whether you're a small insurer or a big insurer, they're investing heavily in ways to, I would think, deliver care, but also reduce costs. Because if you can reduce costs, you'll minimize their exposure and also probably be a lot more effective in getting people healthy.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch play out. We've seen for years, this has been kind of United Health Group's strategy. United Health Group owns United Healthcare, which is the largest insurer in the U.S., private insurer. And it's interesting. There's this big bet that it's basically this bet that you can control the whole healthcare dollar, right? You're as the insurer, you're the one paying for the medical care with people's premiums. And on the other side, you can be the ones getting paid. So ultimately, could that lead to better care? Could we be smarter about how we're paying for care, things like that? That's kind of been United Health Group's bet for a while. I forget exactly how many doctors they employ right now, but it's tens of thousands. And we've seen other people take different approaches. Humana is one that, has invested a lot in different primary care startups. Oak Street Health comes to mind for that. They went public last year and we got a first sense of it. And then Iora Health, we learned they're getting acquired by One Medical. So we learned a lot more about their relationship with Humana through some of the filings related to that acquisition. And it's been really interesting to see. And it's interesting, there's this crop of younger startups that are tackling health insurance. That's companies like Oscar, Clover. These guys have gone public in the last couple months. And it's been interesting, they've really baked in this idea of like, okay, if we can do care delivery and do it well, can we bring down the cost of, the money we're paying out in claims, and can we make people healthier? It's a big bet, and I think we're still seeing whether or not it's the right bet, but it's really curious to see, just how many people are adopting this idea.
Well, I think people are just, I don't know, I wouldn't say they're grasping at straws. I think they're trying to do what they can to reduce cost, waste, and get people healthy, and it really is a long-term bet. We're not going to know tomorrow. We're not going to go 90 days from now, I would think. I think this is something that you learn more about over time, whether it was the right decision. I don't think anyone could argue with trying to do these things in order to bring down the cost of care long term. Well, Lydia, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you always joining us every few weeks to talk about healthcare. It really is important for people to hear all the latest news, and certainly people can check out Dispensed on the Business Insider website. I think you publish every day, right? Well, not Saturdays and Sundays.
Yep.
Or do you publish
weekdays.
Saturday or just the weekdays? I mean, come on, where's the commitment there? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Lydia Ramsey, always a pleasure chatting with you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Welcome back. Now we're going to talk travel. Joining us on the line, he is the multi-talented, multifaceted reporter from MarketWatch, covering real estate, personal finance, and travel, which I think we're going to be talking about today. I'm talking about Jacob Passy. Jacob, great to have you on the program. Great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us again this morning.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So I think, in talking to you in the proverbial green room, which there is no green room, but it's really just before we start the recording, I think you mentioned you want to talk a little bit about travel. So lay it on us. What's the latest? Are people getting out and about and going on trips?
Totally. We're seeing people, taken to the roads, the skies, the seas. Everyone's getting out and about these days. And there was an interesting kind of story I did this week on hotel prices, because this week also the Consumer Price Index came out, the monthly report, which is one of the big inflation reports. And it was another report kind of indicating really high levels of inflation. And there's all the concerns there. And of course, one of the main drivers right now are aspects of travel. So airfares are still, high. Rental cars are still pricey, or pricier than they were, a month ago, a year ago, and hotel prices. So the CPI showed that between May and June, hotel prices rose 8%. And then year over year, they showed that they had risen 17%, which, sounds like, wow, it's runaway inflation in hotel prices, because that's really high. But when I talked to experts in the travel industry, they actually said those numbers are a little misleading, which is perhaps good news depending on where you're going to travel. So for starters, those numbers are kind of averages across, the industry, across hotels around the U.S., but different destinations are going to have very different pricing realities right now. So if you're headed to somewhere like Miami, if you're headed to Disneyland in California, you're going to be paying an arm and a leg for a hotel, because those destinations are in really high demand. But let's say you're visiting your in-laws in Milwaukee. You're probably not going to pay a whole lot, because it's not a major resort destination. And that is the reality across the country, is major resort destinations, vacation destinations like beaches, theme parks, those types of places are seeing really high demand all across the country. But then your smaller towns and cities, and especially places that usually get a lot of business travelers, are not seeing the same demand. So business travel has not come back yet. So if you're looking for a place to stay and there's a convention center or something like that in your area that you're traveling to, consider looking at the hotels around that convention center, because you may find a deal.
Yeah. So what's the rule of thumb here? I mean, even if you're thinking about going away, you do things way more in advance, and try to price things out, and you may be surprised at what you get. So, I mean, obviously, if you think about what you just mentioned, which is like Disney, theme parks, big resorts, you could expect that you're going to pay more just because of demand. But maybe it's time to look at some other places and look sooner rather than later.
Totally. So, and it's all a balancing act, right? So, because obviously you're not just paying for the hotel, you're also paying for, either gas or airfare. And so you have to balance it all out. And so like the interesting thing comparing hotels to airlines, for instance. So obviously both use dynamic pricing. The pricing ebbs and flows with demand. The difference, though, is that hotels can't really add much more capacity. And that's actually another factor that's playing into the pricing right now is, in destinations like Miami, the reason also why hotel prices are skyrocketing so much isn't just demand, although that's probably the largest factor, but it's also capacity. Mm-hmm. The number of rooms is inherently limited. You can't just build a bigger hotel overnight, but also a lot of hotels haven't brought back all of their rooms into service yet because they have limited staff. And so another issue we're seeing is, housekeeping staff is limited, front of desk staff is limited. Those jobs have been slower to come back. Hotels have been slow to rehire because they're trying to keep costs down because they're still hurting from the past year. So as a result of all that, capacity is limited and they can't just add more overnight, really. So that's what drives the prices higher. Airlines, can be more flexible. So if they see way more people want to go to Miami than Milwaukee, well, maybe they'll, cancel some of their routes from, New York to Milwaukee and redirect those planes to service Miami. Mm-hmm. So the reason I bring that up is, this is where the balancing act comes in. You could save a lot by going to a less popular destination, but factor in that your airfare might be more expensive. And, as we've seen this summer, some airlines have also, having a booking isn't a guarantee of a flight. So, American Airlines, for instance, had to cancel a lot of flights this month because they didn't have the staff in place to handle that, handle those flights. So it's a challenging game you have to kind of play. I think the biggest thing to continue looking for is at building in flexibility into your travel plans. So you want to get, if you're going to a location, a destination that might be a little bit off the beaten track, consider, how you'll get there. Are there multiple airlines that service that route? Because if there's only one and then your flight is canceled, that's going to throw a wrench in your plans. Same thing for, hotels. If you, if you're booking into a hotel, make sure that they're in, but then your travel plans have to change. Sorry about that. You want to make sure that there's some flexibility in case you have to cancel that reservation for some reason. So, the same, especially with the Delta variant and everything still evolving with COVID, I think, building in flexibility, booking with travel companies that allow you to waive the change fees, which is pretty standard still for a lot of, airlines. Sometimes you have to pay more or less with airlines and hotels to, or sometimes you have to pay more to get that flexibility, but it could be worth it in the end because things can still very much be up in the air.
Jacob, is it still a good rule of thumb to use some of these tools like Travelocity, cheapoair.com? Do they have the latest, in your estimation? And I'm not saying that you go out and audit every one of these things, but usually, like in Expedia, do they have access to the latest information when you're planning? Are they still the best way to plan, or should you go through a travel agency? Are they going to see more of a resurgence?
So the online travel booking sites like Booking.com, Kayak, Travelocity, they're great places to research. I will say when it comes to airlines, be aware that some of the budget airlines don't list their flights on those sites. Like Southwest is notorious for not listing its flights on any of those sites, I believe. So, if Southwest serves where you're going or serves your local airport, you may want to just check their site directly. I mean, the other thing to be cautious of, although this has changed a little bit throughout the pandemic, but historically, these sites, like when you book directly through, somewhere like Expedia, you are beholden to their policies, not necessarily the airlines.
Yeah.
And that can be a factor if you're dealing with cancellations, weather disruptions, what have you. Sometimes it can make things easier. Sometimes it can make it more challenging. Generally speaking, I think the safest bet and what I tend to do is use those sites as a research tool, and then as much as possible, book directly with the travel provider themselves. So if I find a flight on an airline, United, Alaska, whatever airline, on Kayak or, Google Flights or something like that, I'll then go ahead and book it directly with that airline rather than doing it through the search site. But the search site can be useful for comparing prices, for sure. Also, a lot of, kayak famously will offer you quote unquote hacker fares, where you fly one airline to the destination and then another airline back. So two one-way trips rather than a round trip ticket. And sometimes that can save you a ton of money. So it's good to use them as a research tool for sure. I would just be a little bit cautious before booking with them. But if they, sometimes they offer their own deals. And in those cases, if they are offering a deal that just cannot be beat, before you click purchase, just read the terms of service, make sure you have a sense of what the cancellation policy is and things like that, so you're protected.
Yeah, really smart. I think consumers have to be even better consumers at times like this, with heightened prices, shortages, to get the best deal and also start early. Jacob, it's always a pleasure chatting with you, and I love that you're so multifaceted. We can talk 1 minute about real estate, and we can pivot and talk about travel and personal finance. Have a great rest of the weekend. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Talk soon. Take care.
Bye-bye. Well, that wraps up this episode of BRN Sunday. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, and personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow, this time for BRN AM. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.